Let's just jump right in. For the first century and a half of American history, if you were a colonist, you probably saw the Appalachian Mountains as a curse. I mean, they were this huge, rugged, seemingly endless wall that trapped everyone against the coast. But what if that wall wasn't a prison? What if it was actually a forge, a place that hammered 13 totally different colonies into a single, unified nation? Today, we're going to look at how this one geographic barrier might just be the secret ingredient to America's rise.
And this is really the core idea we're going to unpack. Instead of just seeing these mountains as a big wall that stopped people from spreading out, we're going to see how they forced the colonies to turn inward. To build cities, to trade with each other, and, believe it or not, to actually forge a single identity. The barrier became the very thing that brought them together.
Okay, so to really get how this massive geological feature built a country, we have to understand the wall itself. What exactly are the Appalachian Mountains, and what made them so incredibly difficult to get across?
When you think of big American mountains, you probably picture the Rockies, right? All jagged, snow-capped, and dramatic. But the Appalachians, they're completely different. They're way older, they're more rounded, and they're covered in these incredibly dense green forests. Honestly, they don't look that intimidating. And that's the trick.
Get this, the highest peak in the entire 1,500-mile-long range is Mount Mitchell, at just 6,684 feet. Now, to put that in perspective, the state of Colorado has over 50 peaks that are more than double that height. So that raises a pretty big question.
Right? If they're not crazy high, why did they stop an entire continent's worth of expansion for over 100 years? Why couldn't settlers just, walk over them?
Well, the secret wasn't their height. It was their sheer breadth and complexity. See, the Appalachians aren't just one big ridge you climb and then you're done. No, it's a maze. You'd have to chop your way through a super dense forest, climb up a steep ridge, drop down into a valley, and then boom, you're immediately staring at another ridge, and another, for hundreds of miles, with almost no rivers or natural gaps to help you out.
But their kind of modest look today is hiding a truly epic secret. These mountains are so old, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. They started forming 480 million years ago. That's older than bones, older than trees. And at their peak, geologists are pretty sure they were as tall, if not taller, than the Himalayas are today. Hundreds of millions of years of wind, rain, and ice have just ground those giants down into the rolling hills we see now.
And this is where things get really wild. Back when all the continents were one giant landmass called Pangaea, the Appalachians were the heart of a massive supermountain range. When the continents broke apart, they took pieces of that range with them. So today, you can find their geologic siblings in places like the Anti-Atlas Mountains of Morocco and the Scottish Highlands. I mean, think about that. It's the exact same ancient rock, just separated by an entire ocean.
So, this ancient, continent-spanning wall is what greeted the first European settlers. Now let's see how that geologic feature became a very real human barrier, one that basically slammed the door shut on the rest of the continent.
Even before you got to the mountains themselves, there was another problem, the fall line. Early settlements absolutely depended on rivers for moving goods, but just a few dozen miles inland, the rivers hit this spot where the soft coastal plain meets hard bedrock, creating waterfalls and rapids that boats just couldn't get past. From day one, the colonies were pinned right up against the immediate coast.
The British Crown actually loved this natural barrier so much that they decided to make it official. After the French and Indian War, they issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which drew a line right along the top of the mountains and made it illegal for colonists to cross. Why? Well, it was all about control. Keep everyone pinned to the coast where they could be easily governed and, more importantly, easily taxed.
So you've got a geographic wall and now a political wall. It sounds like a total curse, right? But this is where the whole story flips. Many geographers now argue that the real secret to American success isn't that they eventually crossed the mountains, it's that they were stuck behind them for so long. To really get why, let's just do a little thought experiment. What if the East Coast was as flat and open as, say, the Great Plains? What if those early settlers could have just packed a bag and walked west from the moment they stepped off the boat? Well, for starters, the United States as we know it probably wouldn't exist. People would have just dispersed, spreading out super thin into these tiny, isolated farming communities. They wouldn't have needed to build trade networks up and down the coast, and they sure wouldn't have developed a shared identity. They would have been scattered, disconnected, and really vulnerable.
So here's how the prison became the forge. Because they couldn't go west, the 13 colonies were forced to build up. They built dense cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. Since they couldn't go out, they had to trade north and south with each other, creating this powerful economic network that slowly but surely built a shared identity. 13 very different colonies were literally squished together until they became one. And all that forced closeness became a massive strategic advantage during the American Revolution. The population was concentrated, so it was easier to communicate and organize. And the mountains themselves? They literally guarded the colonists' backs, making it almost impossible for the British Army to sweep around and attack them from the interior. The prison had become a fortress.
So this geographic prison basically incubated the United States. But, eventually the pressure gets to be too much, and the new nation was ready to break out. This is the moment the training wheels come off.
But that big question was still there. With the population booming and land on the coast running out, how in the world do you get across this supposedly impassable mountain range? Turns out, you don't go over it. You find the one crack where you can squeeze through.
Deep in the mountains, geography had provided this one incredible loophole, the Cumberland Gap. Now, indigenous peoples had known about it and used it for centuries, but in 1775, a frontiersman named Daniel Boone famously hacked a 200-mile trail through it, creating what became known as the Wilderness Road. And just like that, the door to the west was blown wide open.
And the moment that crack appeared, the floodgates opened. It was a brutal, dangerous journey, no doubt about it. But despite all the hardships, over 300,000 settlers poured through the Cumberland Gap in just a few decades, spilling out into the huge, fertile lands of the Ohio River Valley. And this is the final key to the whole thing. That century and a half spent trapped behind the mountains, it acted like a perfect set of training wheels. By forcing the U.S. to build cities and factories first, the country was actually prepared for the much, much harsher West. By the time they finally reached the Rockies, they weren't just using rickety wagons. They were laying transcontinental railroads and stringing telegraph wires, all thanks to the industrial base they'd been forced to build back east.
Today, of course, the mountains aren't a barrier anymore, but their legacy is absolutely everywhere. The rich coal seams in those hills fueled the American Industrial Revolution. The isolated valleys gave birth to uniquely American music like bluegrass and country, and it's home to incredible natural treasures like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most visited one in the country, and the legendary Appalachian Trail.
So, in the end, that rugged, impenetrable wall of trees and stone, it wasn't a curse at all. By standing in the way, this ancient mountain range forced 13 little colonies to stop, to grow together, and to build the foundations for an industrial powerhouse. The Appalachians didn't trap the United States, they forged it.
So that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. We've seen how a massive barrier actually became an asset. What other geographic curses throughout history might have actually been blessings in disguise? It's a powerful way to rethink the very maps that have shaped our world.